Grand Haven community came together today in heartbreak and unity. A crowd gathering together in prayer and remembrance of the 8 lives lost in what police are calling a possible murder, suicide, arson.
Does it ever feel like 2026 made up its mind to break us before it even got started? January brought El Mancho, and people could not look away. February arrived, and Nancy Guthrie disappeared without a single answer left behind. We were still sitting with both of those when Lynette Hooker's case hit the headlines. And just weeks ago, the entire country watched in shock as the investigation unfolded into Nolan Wells, the 18-year-old college football player who went missing during a 4th of July boat trip on Horn Island, Mississippi, leaving behind glaring contradictions, a grieving family, and calls for justice that echoed across the nation. Loss after loss, mystery after mystery, and this year is not even through its summer months. Then came Grand Haven Township, Michigan. Before the quiet community near Lake Michigan was even fully awake, emergency responders were called to a home engulfed in smoke and flames, where a scene of unimaginable horror awaited. Inside, 8 lives were found dead. Mandy Karolkiewicz, a beloved local substitute teacher, and her 6 children, ranging in age from just 5 to 15 years old. 6 young lives, full of promise, cut short in a single horrifying night. The man who turned the gun on them before taking his own life was Kristopher Karolkiewicz, their father, her husband, a man neighbors saw in the driveway every week, someone who appeared to the outside world to be a quiet, hard-working family man living in Ottawa County. Most channels covered this tragedy and stopped at the surface headlines. Today, we go deeper. We are going to look at the mounting economic strain, the recent job loss, the unaddressed behavioral red flags, and the core psychological question that every community member in Grand Haven is now left living with. What were the signs, and why wasn't a single one of them enough to stop this? To understand how a family ends up here, you have to look past the suburban facade and into the compounding pressure points inside the household. Kristopher Karolkiewicz and his wife Mandy built their life in Grand Haven, raising 6 children together. To neighbors and community members, Mandy was deeply involved in local education, and Kristopher was quiet, focused on providing for his large family. But behind closed doors, severe financial and emotional pressures were spiraling out of control. In the period leading up to the tragedy, the household was straining under immense weight. Kristopher had recently lost his job, stripping away both financial stability and a core sense of identity. At the same time, friends and family noted growing tension within the home as marital fractures began to deepen. People around him saw the strain. They saw the stress and the behavioral shifts. But in everyday life, severe personal crisis is often written off as ordinary hardship until it turns lethal. When you examine cases of extreme domestic violence and familicide, you almost never find a sudden, random explosion of rage out of nowhere. What you find instead is a paper trail of missed indicators spread across different personal and financial stress points that were never interrupted. In intimate partner violence research, pre-separation tension combined with catastrophic life events like a sudden job loss or financial collapse creates an extremely volatile environment. When a perpetrator feels a total loss of financial and emotional control, explicit or implicit threats often emerge. Because those private family struggles and emotional warning signs remain within immediate circles, they rarely trigger a public crisis intervention, a domestic violence registry entry, or a wellness screening before a breaking point is reached. When you look at the complete picture in Grand Haven, there were multiple distinct risk factors sitting in isolation: sudden job loss, severe economic strain, marital instability, unaddressed mental health decline, and legal access to a firearm inside the home. Multiple red flags, completely disconnected, never assembled into a single warning sign before it was too late. Criminologists and forensic psychologists who specialize in familicide point to a consistent behavioral pattern in these rare but catastrophic events. Perpetrators of familicide rarely act on sudden impulse. The violence is calculated and planned. It often begins with a perceived loss of control as personal or financial failure becomes undeniable. In the days and hours immediately preceding the act, the perpetrator often presents as unusually calm, waving to neighbors, running ordinary errands, or behaving as though everything is normal. The primary psychological trigger is not sudden anger, it is the perception of a total loss of status and control. When the reality of financial downfall or family breakdown becomes inevitable, the perpetrator views it as a point of no return. The murder of the family, followed by suicide or arson, becomes a desperate, catastrophic attempt to exert absolute control over an outcome they feel they can no longer handle. The timeline established by law enforcement reveals the chilling sequence of events that took place in Haven Township. In the hours prior, there were no outward disturbances reported at the home. But late that night and into the early morning hours, Kristopher Karolkiewicz carried out his pre-planned attack against his wife and 6 children while they were inside their home. To conceal the crime, he set fire to the residence before ending his own life. First responders arriving at the scene battled the fire only to make the heartbreaking discovery inside. Ottawa County Sheriff's officials later confirmed that all 8 family members died from gunshot wounds in a murder-suicide that left the entire state of Michigan in mourning. When you step back from the timeline and look at the complete picture of what happened in Grand Haven, the systemic questions become impossible to ignore. How can communities better recognize the severe danger when severe job loss and domestic distress collide? What resources exist to intervene when someone in a large family unit shows signs of catastrophic mental breakdown? And how do we break the silence around domestic crises before they turn fatal? This case is not just a tragedy. It is a stark warning about the lethal danger of isolated personal crises and unaddressed warning signs. As the official investigations by the Ottawa County Sheriff's Office and state authorities conclude, we continue to remember the victims whose lives were so tragically cut short. If this is the kind of true crime reporting you value, sourced, analytical, verified, and free of unnecessary filler or cheap sensationalism, please subscribe to the channel. Every case we cover is built on the same foundation: confirmed facts, naming open questions as open, and honoring the victims by demanding a full and honest accounting of what happened. Mandy Karolkiewicz and her 6 children deserved every year that was taken from them. That full accounting is still being written, and we will be here when it is.